All right, guys, we've got free agency in a few days. We just had the NBA draft. I wanted to talk about the draft. I want to talk about free agency and a little bit of what I expect with the Jazz. I expect a little bit more than the draft, but who knows? Let's talk about it. It's the Hoopsner Show. All right, guys, so the draft was a few days ago. It feels like forever ago that the Jazz had their draft, and I'm not gonna lie, it was such a bummer that night. And the fact that literally nothing happened for the Jazz. I mean, yes, they made a few post-draft pickups that looked pretty interesting, mildly interesting. We'll see how it goes in Summer League. But because the Jazz just did not make a single move, I was so dejected. I went upstairs and I ate some brownies. You want to know how sad draft night was for me and how I couldn't. No, you guys know when you follow this show that we do the post game shows every game. I do them every time I can, unless I'm like really sick or out of town, no internet. We do a post game show. I couldn't do it. I couldn't get up here and talk to you about how they couldn't do it. I was so dejected. My wife actually took our kids to her parents' house to allow me to be here to do all the work for the draft, and they literally did nothing. How sad is that? How sad is my life sometimes? When something like that happens, I was so dejected. So dejected. Literally zero. Nothing. The Jazz didn't trade in with cash for a second-round pick. Zero. Nothing. I honestly couldn't believe it. Even to this day, 2 days later or whatever it is, absolutely shocked. So I ate some brownies and I sat down and played some Fortnite, and then I found out Danny Ainge was nice enough to pick some guys up at 11:30. So your boy got to stay up till 1:30 in the morning writing about Kofi Coburn. And we're going to say Coburn because if we don't say it right, it sounds pretty bad. But anyways, look what you're doing to me, Danny Ainge. You added pounds to my belly, Danny Ainge, with the sadness. This is a brownie belly, and it's your fault. You put the pounds on me. Anyways, I'm over it. I'm dejected about it. The Jazz should have made a move, although that's based off of what I wish the Jazz would do. They didn't do it. And now there's two reasons that possibly that happened. It could just flat out be no one was willing to take what the Jazz were offering. Now, is that based off of Danny Ainge asking for too much with their players? Or is it because other teams were just like, you know what? We'd rather have the number 4 pick, although the Sacramento Kings are the stupidest franchise in the world for that pickup or for that draft. But they'd rather have Jaden Ivey, a young, fresh talent on a really small contract instead of a Donovan Mitchell who got worse last year and doesn't play defense and costs like $35 million. They decided they'd probably rather go with the young prospect. Something the Jazz should think about now that they're over the cap. But anyways, I don't know. Now, I think what happened in the draft is going to affect what happens in free agency. It has to. It has to. I mean, the Jazz, and maybe I could be wrong. We do know from every report we've seen, if you're reading SLC Dunk, make sure, if you're not, go to SLC Dunk, read about all the rumors. We'll get some more of that stuff out there. But basically what we know is that the Jazz are trying to make a trade, and it hasn't happened yet. Now, that may happen in the next 2 or 3 days. It could happen before this video is even uploaded. But for now, it looks like the Jazz, what is going to happen with the Jazz is, one, they're going to try to compete next year. That means they are not making trades that like make them worse, apparently. I personally think they should. But that's apparently not what they're going to do, and that's one of the signs from the draft. That's one of the things we can take from the draft. The Jazz do not want to be worse next year. I do know from talking to a few people, there were guys in the draft the Jazz liked. But obviously they weren't willing to give up what it would take to get them, or at least other teams weren't wanting it. You know, it could have been that the Jazz wanted more for Rudy Gobert than what teams were willing to give, but then what teams wanted to give them for someone like Bojan Bogdanovic or Mike Conley apparently wasn't enough to Utah, you know? I mean, honestly, if you're giving Mike Conley up for scraps, I actually think that's a pretty decent idea for multiple reasons. But if you're not going to get anything, you don't just trade him just to trade him. But at this point, here's what I think the Jazz are going to do, and this is what Danny Ainge is doing. At least this is what I think they are doing. I'm trying to ascertain what what's going on with Danny Ainge and Ryan Smith. I think what's going to happen is the Jazz are still going to make these moves, but guess what? It might not be for draft picks, obviously. What it's going to be is probably still some of these rumors we've seen with like the Atlanta Hawks, for like John Collins, who sounds like he's going somewhere. We've got the Washington Wizards supposedly looking for a veteran point guard. I actually think that'll happen. And then other moves where you've got other teams. Chicago, they want Rudy Gobert. We've heard that Minnesota has asked about Rudy Gobert. We've got teams that are asking about the Jazz guys. Mike Conley apparently has trade interest out there. At this point, I don't know if there really can be a prediction made, because what's going on, and it's kind of makes sense with how Danny Ainge does things, is Danny Ainge is playing the waiting game. Danny Ainge has more patience than you. He has more patience than me, for sure. He is waiting to see who out there finally decides that they want to do what he's asking. So what's going to happen in free agency? It starts July 1st. There's going to be a lot of teams going for a small amount of good players. And lots of teams are talking themselves into being able to get a guy or do a sign and trade or something like that. And there's going to be teams that strike out. And one thing's for sure that you've got to remember is there are certain GMs that do not want to come out of these situations empty-handed, where they have owners saying, like, if you're Sacramento, they want to win. And if it's a Sacramento GM that finds out that they need to do something to win, if they strike out in free agency with whatever they're doing in Sacramento, someone like that might be willing to make a big move with the Jazz to move somebody. Now, a lot of this is already set in stone. Certain teams have already made the picks. That's the thing that's what sucked about the Jazz not trading into the draft, is they don't get to control what the pick is. So, but obviously that's not what the Jazz wanted to do. The thing that is going on right now is Danny Ainge is waiting for guys to strike out. Teams that have had an offseason, maybe that's not that interesting or didn't get them to the next level. Like, for example, Charlotte. Charlotte probably has big ideas with Gordon Hayward, and they're going to want to make a move. And if it doesn't happen, they're going to be more willing to listen to Danny Ainge at that point and say, well, you know what? We at least know what we can get with Ainge if this plan doesn't work out. And maybe we're overpaying a little bit for this, but we at least get the guy. Like, there's issues going on in Charlotte right now. I think the big one is Mike Conley. I think the Jazz honestly have to move Mike Conley. One, because the Jazz are over the cap. Yeah, that's the other thing I want to thank the Jazz for. They did not have any draft picks this year. They do not have any cap space. So we don't got no draft picks. We don't got no cap space. And our jerseys are yellow and suck. No, just kidding. But anyways, there's just right now the Jazz are waiting and looking to make a move. They're looking to be the team that can help out someone else, because the Jazz have really legitimate, nice assets. You know, there's teams out there that I'm sure would love to have Bojan Bogdanovic, and he has a reasonable contract that's actually really tradable. So maybe there's a team out there that is willing to move Bojan Bogdanovic. Like, at a certain point, the Atlanta Hawks might say, you know what? I guess if we can't get one of these players we want, maybe we do go after like Bojan Bogdanovic and Mike Conley. Or the same goes for like the Washington Wizards. Like, can we get Mike Conley if we strike out? I actually think there's a small part of me, and this probably is just me hoping, but maybe a team like the Wizards picked for the Jazz, you know, or maybe the Jazz are looking at teams now that picked guys that they like. Because I know for sure there were guys the Jazz really liked, and it's interesting that did someone pick one of the guys the Jazz liked, that the Jazz can now make a trade and get the draft pick they wanted. And that way they can both like get rid of a big contract for an older player to bring in some young talent. And obviously what the goal is next year is build it around Donovan Mitchell. Although I would say, and I'm probably going to do another video about this next after this one, is I don't think they should really be building around anyone on the Jazz roster right now, because there's some things in next year's draft. His name's Wembanyama, and the Jazz need to think about that. All right, guys, that's all I got today, but I just wanted to get some thoughts out there. I wanted to get a free agency video out there. It sucks. The Jazz had no draft picks. Like I said, they have no cap space. So there's like no one they can go after in the free agency. Rough offseason for Jazz fans, because literally can't do anything. Thanks, Dennis Lindsay. Thanks a lot. You sure made it fun for the channel and for SLC Dog. All right. By the way, shout out to our All-Stars. You guys are amazing. If you haven't already, like and subscribe to the channel. I will talk to you next time.